All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Debate Club. So, this is a platform where we all engage in healthy debates and discussions every week, and sometimes on Wednesdays when we have special topics or discussions to be made. So, the topic for this week's debate is Indian democracy is under threat. Agree or disagree? So, to set the context for this, there are basically two stances on the spectrum. One where people believe that Indian democracy is under threat uh, due to facts like minority rights being restricted and a lot of NGOs being shut down due to legal restrictions and other stuff where the media is biased. And there are people on the other end of the spectrum where they believe that the democracy is not under threat because we still have like a process of free and fair elections going on in the country. The media may not be as biased as we perceive it to be, and other reasons. So, with that context in place, I believe we can now start letting people speak their minds on the topic. So, people who wish to speak can raise their hands using the reaction button, and you will be given a chance to speak in that order. All right, Raghav, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I mean, this is not about the actual topic, but I just want to make a quick announcement. So last Wednesday we had a session regarding the brainstorming session, and that was based on the topic for the previous debate. And we decided that we're gonna convert the Wednesday sessions into brainstorming sessions where we are expressly discussing to arrive at a constructive outcome, not instead of just like us sharing and exchanging ideas and like disagreeing openly and respectfully. We are just like we're also focusing on doing something productive at the end of it. So um, we will be making more announcements on what's going to happen in this Wednesday session in the WhatsApp group. I just wanted to announce that. But yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Raghav. So yeah, coming back to the topic of the debate, if you wish to speak up, please raise your hands using the reaction button. Yes, Tasneem, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I would like to take a stand that Indian democracy is not under threat because we all know that Indian democracy is one of the largest democracies in the world, and we still have the free and fair means of elections, and the majority has the right to vote and also to select their own leaders, and also the expression and freedom of opinion is still present, and we can always protest for our rights whenever we are possible, like for example the farmers protest and the other protests which are coming up recently.
Thank you so much, Tasneem. I'll now let Samarth go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Rose. There are certain things happening in India, and we're going to have to discuss about whether its effect is to advance or diminish the cause of democracy in India. So one argument that can be made is that the central law enforcement agencies, they seem to focus their effort on politicians belonging to certain political coalition and not another. I anticipate such arguments being made by others from this group, who would say that this has an overall effect of diminishing democracy. Uh, you know, that is the one argument that could be made. But I would like to focus on another argument, which is that like. This acts of diminishment of Indian democracy, it can take various forms. And one of them could be like acts of diminishment of India. So that too contributes like diminishing Indian democracy in India. So a prime example of that could be engaging in separatist activities or espousing beliefs or holding such separatist sentiments. So they have the effect of diminishing the territorial integrity of India. And in that way, they diminish the cause of Indian democracy. So one big example is the Kashmir conflict. So this has been a problem since the last several decades. And although the acts of separatist violence, it has reduced in the recent years, it is very much an ongoing problem. I am not aware of any poll that was conducted recently to gauge the sentiment among the people of Kashmir, to gauge the separatist sentiment. I am only aware of a poll that was conducted a couple of decades ago, which said that the majority of the people living in the Kashmiri Valley, if they had a chance to participate in an election to decide on their future course of whether their state must become a separate nation or not, majority of the people living in the Kashmir Valley would vote for separatism. But the major and this is restricted to just people in the Kashmir Valley. Whereas the people living in the Jammu region or in the Ladakh region, they were found to be perfectly content to live within the confines of present-day Indian state. So that is why I would say that this is an issue, and the separatist sentiment that is present in present-day Kashmir. The same thing can be also be said to apply to various northeast Indian states. For example, in Nagaland too, there has been a long-running insurgency, and I would assume that if a poll was conducted gauging the separatist sentiment, that a significant minority of the people there too would espouse such similar beliefs. So this brings into question what I think is a very important question. So is maintaining democratic practices and norms, is it so important that the national sovereignty of India should take a backseat to it? Because many people are of the view that such a plebiscite should be held in the states which want to go for a separate nation, and that so people hold such a view that holding such a plebiscite will advance the cause of democracy. But the question now becomes, is the cause of democracy so important that the cause of territorial integrity and sovereignty should take a backseat to it? So that will be my argument for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samarth. Venkat, please go ahead.
Yes, the last two speakers have made a number of important points. So I just thought I'll take a moment to define what we mean by democracy and what we mean when we ask the question, is democracy under threat? My understanding of this topic is that there are certain rights that individuals hold in a democratic country, which individuals in a non-democratic country don't hold. The right to free and fair elections, as Tasneem said, that's an important one, very important. And then the freedom to assemble, free speech, untrammeled free speech, certain political institutions that are designed to be independent, they must continue to be independent, especially the Election Commission, the judiciary, and various other government and public bodies. Freedom to engage in political activity, freedom to criticize the government, freedom to criticize the Prime Minister in particular, So those are the metrics, those are the yardsticks. There are many more, but these are some of the important ones that we use to measure whether democracy in the country is flourishing or is it under threat. And in one sense, democracy in any democratic country is always under threat because there are always forces that want to diminish these freedoms in order to enlarge their own power. And the ruling party at any given point in time, regardless of which party is ruling, must be regarded with some level of suspicion. Are they trying to increase their power at the expense of the freedom of the people, or are they are they fair in their dealings with the people, with opposition leaders, and so on? The point about separatist sentiment, I think it's an important point because the territorial integrity of the country is important. But I think it's a different topic. It's not directly what we are talking about. It's not exactly what we are talking about, which is the quality of democracy in the country as it exists today. There are a number of reasons for concern, especially in the last 10, 11 years. We can see a pattern of opposition leaders who have been particularly vocal in their criticism of the government, in their criticism of the prime minister being targeted. The supporters of the government would say that this is just the enforcement directorate acting independently. But there have been this pattern of two opposition leaders, one being expelled from parliament, an elected leader, right? People elected her, she was expelled from parliament. One opposition leader who was expelled and who had to whose election was disqualified, who had to claw his way back in. Another opposition leader put in jail for supposed corruption charges. These things are a pattern, a very troubling pattern, something that we should be concerned about. Perhaps that's the reason that the government's majority has reduced, at least one of the reasons why the government's majority has reduced, and India has once again become a coalition government. That could be among the reasons. So I'm also told that academic independence in universities has declined a lot. University employees, lecturers, professors apparently are required to show a certain ideological adherence in order to get promoted or recognized. That is another area. Once academic freedom is compromised, the country is on a very slippery slope. We have certainly, all of us, heard reports of a certain community being targeted for residence demolition. Again, the ostensible reason given is that they were in violation of the law. But the fact that it is suspicious that only members of a certain community would be in violation of the law, right, and others not. So one wonders if this is some kind of law enforcement, but they're enforcing a different law to what we are seeing openly. So there are a number of areas of concern. The one freedom that seems to have survived amidst all this is free and fair elections and our ability to vote. And in the 2024 elections, the people of India have decisively used that power to basically cut down the powers of the government. And that is important. So when the people are given a voice, they do express themselves. But I do see a number of areas of concern over the last 10, 11 years. And it is up to us as citizens to make sure that we preserve those rights and reclaim those rights when we lose them. That is what I would say, that I think there are causes for concern, for special concern over the last 10, 11 years.
Okay, great points, Venkat. Thank you so much. Raghav, please go ahead.
Okay, so I was just fiddling with the timer, so I was not paying attention to a lot of the things that Venkat was saying. But I see a lot of people, making this claim that Indian democracy is dead. This is especially on spaces like Reddit. When you go there, like, you see people like, bashing Indian. There's always like a pessimistic tone to things. And I personally feel that, if India is not a decent, well-performing democracy that should inspire optimism in the citizens, and there are problems, of course, everywhere has problems, And if we are not there, then I want to see who is. Because comparatively, when you making a claim that Indian democracy is under threat, like, there's somehow this implicit claim that we are doing especially poor compared to other regions or something. I think that people are kind of insular in India, that we only look at our own problems. We're not focusing on the issues that exist elsewhere. And this is not for the people in this group, because I feel like we are a special group. Like, I feel like we're all intellectually motivated, and we are proactively participating in this group. Just the fact that you're proactively spending your Saturday morning on this group means that you care about these things. You're maybe more informed than the general population. But I'm talking about the general population. I just feel like there is a certain sentiment that only India has problems or something. I think that is maybe leading to an especially harsh labeling of what is going on here. But I feel like we should be looking at things optimistically. I feel like there's of course room for improvement, but I do think that there is no substance to a lot of the claims that Indian democracy is under threat. But I'm really curious to see somebody who disagrees with me, to see what they see as the reasons. But that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Raghav. I'll let Ashwin go ahead.
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yes, Ashwin.
Just a second. 1 second. Yeah, here I am. Okay, first of all, I wanted to ask again from each of you, what is democracy and what is the relation with referendum? In India, I mentioned in the previous debate about the helmet rule. If we have a referendum of helmet rule, I bet 99% of the people wouldn't go for the helmet rule, and they would choose what they wish to do so. So the Google definition says, I mean, where people have a say in the government, either directly or indirectly. That's what I read. So, and Samarth spoke about separatism, and India separated from Britain, by the way. So, I mean, based on what Samarth spoke, I assume it implies that what India did from Britain was wrong. And the same is going on with Balochistan, Sindh, and KPK in Pakistan, and also Kurdistan with Turkey. So separatism may not always be wrong, is my point. To speak about Indian democracy, ED is targeting the opposition particularly. If you look at the number of cases of BJP candidates and their relatives versus the opponents, I mean, the opponents are blacklisted and have more number of cases on them. This is the same thing in the past as well, even when the Congress government was in power. So I believe India is far from being a perfect democracy, even in the past, in the present, and even in the future, it will be far from being a perfect democracy. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashwin. I'll now let Nachiketa go ahead. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
Hi, yes, it's Nachiketa. So
Okay.
first of all, I would like to say that there are really great points coming from everyone in this debate. And according to me, I feel that if you see what are the basic tenets of a democracy, that is the free and fair elections and regular elections, also providing a space for criticism, providing a media, which is the fourth pillar of the democracy. Although I do agree that the Indian media can be sort of biased, and nowadays the Indian media is also not, the traditional Indian media is not very reliable. But also I think we can see that it's not necessarily always allied to the ruling party. We also see media being allied to several opposition parties as well. So that is there. Then there is also the role of social media, and which has its own space. And I feel that if you see all the basic tenets of a democracy, like what must be there in a democracy, like theoretically, then I feel that yes, Indian democracy is not under threat. But then it is also depends on how far we can go, but how far we can go and where we need to draw a line, right? So, like, do we want to make India a liberal democracy like the West? Is that the question? And if we see the Western model of democracy as what do you say, as a standard, then I feel Indian democracy is much better in that way. Because if someone mentioned about separatist elements, right? But then that has to do with nation building, and nation building is an unfinished process everywhere, even in the US. We see that the blacks, the women, the migrants, the indigenous communities, they still are not fully a part of their socio-political system. So I feel if we compare in with regards to that, then Indian democracy is still not under threat. And let me diverge a bit, and I would say that even we as citizens are responsible for ensuring that our democracy is not under the, because it is said that Suri, your mic is on.
Guys,
Oh,
please do not unmute
sorry.
yourself when you're not speaking.
Yes, so I was saying that it is said that you deserve a government that you choose, right? So democracy also questions the intelligence of the masses. So I think it's also the responsibilities of the citizens to be well informed, be well aware, and also choose the government which we think would establish our democracy well. So as Ambedkar was asked in an interview that you have made such a beautiful constitution, but do you think it will work? So he said that my job was to make the constitution. Now it depends on the representatives of the people to run it effectively in the country. So I feel it is also a lot of responsibility, and also there is Gunnar Myrdal's book on soft state, and he refers to India there. So the general indiscipline and the general lack of civic sense in India, I think that is also responsible for making Indian democracy under threat, and not just the actions of the government. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Prince, you're up next.
Yeah. So first of all, in this dangerous and volatile region where we have China, a totalitarian country on our borders, and neighboring countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, which are pseudo-democracies, and Nepal and Bhutan, which are broken democracy, I would rather argue that
I'm sorry to interrupt, Prince. Is it just me, or like your voice is not very clear? I mean, you're audible, but it's not very clear.
It's not clear. The mic is not clear.
Yeah.
is it better now?
Not really.
It sounds like it's either far away or like maybe you're using a low quality mic. Can you just
Okay, I removed my mic, so is it better now?
it's still
No, it's not
bad,
better. Still bad.
but go ahead. Maybe we can
Okay,
do it next time.
maybe I can go after the next participant. Till then, I'll
Sure.
figure out.
Okay. All right, Sandeep, I guess you can go ahead.
Yeah. So before talking about Indian democracy, I would like to dissect the evolution of democracy itself, because the democracy might be mathematically impossible. This is not a value judgment or a comment about human nature, nor a statement about how rare and unstable democratic societies have been in the history of civilization. So our current attempt at democracy, the methods we use to elect our leaders, are fundamentally irrational. And this is well established mathematical fact, actually. So in India, we use the voting system, which is referred to as the first past the post, which means the winner is the candidate who with the most votes. Which means if one candidate gets 10% of the votes, and if it is the highest votes he compared to others, even that person would become the would get elected. Unfortunately, this is the system that we copied from the British, which is still in use in about 44 countries around the world. And 30 of these countries were former British colonies, including India, USA, and Canada. So this sometimes leads to a situation where the majority of the country did not vote for the party that ended up holding the power. In the last 78 years of the last 78 years of Indian election terms, there are 18 election terms, and BJP held power for 6 times, and Indian National Congress held power for about 10 times. Out of these 18 terms, only half the terms majority of the voters have voted for the winning party, which means more than 50% of the people voted for this. Out of 18, only 9 times more than 50% of the people voted for that party which came into power. Rest of the time, the party which got less than 50% of the votes got into power. And another pitfall of this voting system is if a candidate with lesser votes supports might end up winning, which means if A has like 39%, B has 41%, and C has like 20%, people who prefer A also prefer C, but over the B. But because the people who prefer A voted for the A, the A candidate will not get elected, but the B candidate will get elected. Although this 39% of the people prefer the candidate C, right? Which is about 59% of them. This is actually exactly what happened during the election of during the camp when George W. Sorry, who is this guy? I'm sorry. This was the election. Yeah, George Bush and Al Gore, right? There is a third candidate who got about 39%, 40% of the votes, but he lost. But the people who voted for him prefer Al Gore instead of George Bush, right? So, but George Bush ended up getting into the power. So because of this, the voter tends to choose a bigger party than a smaller one, because the smaller party has a higher chance of losing. So the voter ends up voting for the bigger parties. So this winner takes all the system leads to concentration of power in larger parties, and eventually leading to a two-party system. So this is actually called divergence law. There are a lot of mathematicians that have been dissecting our democracy for more than hundreds of years. So I think the Indian voting system itself is not a great option, but there are other types of voting systems which usually there is only there is only one other type of voting system which is used in rest of a lot of other countries, which is called preferential voting or ranked choice voting. So I think so this is like you rank the candidates according to your preference. Like if there are 5 candidates, you give them ranking, but it also has its own shortcomings. So there is like another type of voting system which is called rated voting. So instead of ranking the 10 candidates, the voter might simply just take the candidates that they approve of. So there are also versions of where you could indicate how strongly you approve each candidate. Let's say from -10 to +10, the one with the highest approval wins. So approval voting is not new. It was used by priests in the Vatican from 12th to 16th century and to elect the Pope. Also used to elect the Secretary General of the United States, but never been used in the large scale election in the real world. So more testing is likely required. So I'd like just to, if you give me like 30 seconds, I'll just finish it off. So I think democracy is the worst form of government, except for all other forms that have been tried. So democracy is not perfect, but it's the best thing that we have got. The game might be crooked, but it's the only game in town. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandeep. Prince, is the issue with your mic resolved?
Yeah, is it better now?
Yes, kind of. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll start from the beginning. In this volatile environment where we see a country like China with totalitarian government and our neighboring countries such as Pakistan and Bangladesh, which are more or less pseudo democracies, and Nepal and Bhutan, which are broken democracies, I would assume that India is the only lighthouse of democracy in this crooked region. Some of the questions that might arise that may lead people to think, our democracy is in threat. Democracy is known for its power structure and the cooperation. In the recent times itself, we have seen the cooperation being done greatly by the current government, whether it is accommodating the protesters or forming joint parliament committees for laws such as the amendment of the Waqf Board Act, and there are several laws that are in the background that are still in their drafting phases. There also a lot of opposition leaders are being sought to and heard of. And the second part being the power structure. I guess this is the most important part of democracy. If the election is free and fair and there is a smooth transition of power, I don't think in any shape or form the democracy is under threat. Usually we think the threat is only from the people in power, but if the democracy is under threat, then it could come under threat by the opposition leaders as well. Are we going to have a free and fair election in this Kashmir elections, which is going to be held at the end of September, where US diplomats are openly meeting with the opposition leaders in Kashmir and meeting opposition leaders like Kharge. I won't name the diplomat. Yeah. Some other allegations are that central agencies put pressure on opposition. But we need to take a step back and see why is the pressure being put. One of the agencies that's named like n number of times is the ED. Now, what power does ED hold? ED can only investigate the matters related to money laundering, forex violation, and bank fraud. Are we going to discredit an institution which can work only in the issues of money laundering and forex violations and ignore the fact that the cases that are being put are proven also? Are the cases arbitrary? No. We saw someone in Jharkhand have 335 crore rupees in just cash. I guess one of the previous speakers spoke about the elected members being expelled. Mahua Moitra was being expelled for sharing login credentials of the parliament website and taking bribe for asking certain questions in parliament. Similar for Rahul Gandhi, it is an old law, so I will not go into that. If any sitting member of parliament get any crime proven against him and the punishment given to him is more than 2 years in jail, then his candidature is automatically expelled. Even though it's not followed very well, as we saw in the case of Mr. Gandhi as well. So was the case of Arvind Kejriwal. He was arrested for excise policy and the corruption in that, and the liquor policy. We saw what happened due to this corruption. There is no drinking water in Delhi. People are forced to buy the water from the tanker mafia. Yamuna, we are hearing for the last 10-15 years that the Yamuna is going to get clean. And in the recent history only, several UPSC aspirants were drowned. There were open wires where they were electrocuted to death. Where is the structure here? Not going into the structure. I guess one of the speakers said that we are expelling sitting members of parliament who are elected by people. Is this democracy? If anything, this is monarchy. That once we have elected someone as the king, he is there in power for eternity. No, if the said person has done something illegal or against the law, then he is equally liable to all the processes that a common citizen is. And I don't think just because he was elected, there is some kind of a special criteria for them. Yeah, Rose.
Great argument, Prince. Thank you so much. Gautam, you're up next. Gautam, are you there?
Yes. Very good morning. I heard everyone's viewpoints, so I think that our democracy is not under threat, but the many of the institutions I feel are compromised. If you see the selection of the Election Commissioner of India, earlier the Chief Justice of India said that there should be the leader of opposition, there should be the Chief Justice of India, and then the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. But that was reversed by the government. And then if you see the cases that has been put against the journalists and the social activists, the tightening of the NGOs, the new FCRA rule where their funding is getting affected. And then if you see the uh, thing for the independence of all the institutions, like the Supreme Court had said that CBI is a caged parrot. They are singing the tunes of the ruling establishment. And if you see the appointment for vice chancellors in universities, most vice chancellors in the university now are from the RSS background. So that has been, RSS is the parent body for the ruling parties, that is the BJP. And if you see our rankings, the data is not at all available. Like for the census is not conducted, and for the caste census also there has been a lot of delay, and it's not known whether the caste census would be done or not done, or what is the status, etc. And if you see in case of the opposition, Rahul Gandhi was like dismissed last time for surname of Modi something, and a lot of cases the institutions are very proactively, they do a lot of work when it comes to the opposition parties, but when it comes to the ruling parties, they do the work, but it's slow or not very inconclusive. That is, you don't know where it is exactly going, or in that sense. And I see we need to uh, make our institutions more strong, and we need to ensure that there is no instances of one party or one ideology capturing the institutions, because that would mean that civil liberties and minority rights are affected, and it would mean that things are not that good. If you see the recent comments of our Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, hum batenge to katenge, and in light of the whatever they tell that about what happened in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, and in Maldives, and also they try to project that in India also there is always the angle of always telling that deep state is working in this way, and all people are conspiring against the supreme leader and all those things. So I would like to rest my case by telling that the democracy is not under threat as of now, but the institutions are compromised, and we all know what is the state of our media. They sing they dance to the tune of the ruling establishment. They don't ask uncomfortable questions. They ask questions which are very nice. आप आम चूस के खाते हो कि काट के खाते हो, and all those things. And
All right, thank you so much, Gautam. Great points right there. I could personally relate to a few points that you made. So yeah, there's that. Thank you so much. Samarth, please go ahead.
When I brought up the point of separatism in India and how that is a cause for concern for Indian democracy, one of the arguments that was given against that one was like how this is a separate issue and it is not related to the present discussion of Indian democracy. And I would say that there was no cogent argument given over there. if the features of the democracy, of any democracy, if essential features of any democracy are like the smooth transition of power and then freedom of speech, and then necessarily the right to self-determination, that also belongs to the group of essential democratic features. And this right to self-determination, like when that exists, that means it should be applicable to all parts of India. So I don't think I was bringing up like a non-existent issue of separatism into this discussion of democracy. I think it is a very relevant discussion to have. So now that I've established like the right to self-determination is an essential feature of democracy, now comes the important question of who gets to determine whether the people of the Kashmir Valley, if they want to have a separate state, they can have a separate state. Is it only the people living in the Kashmir Valley, or is it the people living in the entire state of J&K? Well, it was previously Jammu and Kashmir. Now it has been divided into union territories, I believe. Is it the people belonging to the erstwhile region of Jammu and Kashmir, or is it the entire people of India? If it is the entire people of India, then obviously they will vote for Jammu and Kashmir to be placed within India. So that is the democratic process working to quell the separatist sentiment and for Kashmir to remain in India. So I think that also answers the argument brought up by Ashwin that India essentially it's separated from Britain. India, it acted in a separatist manner. To secede from Britain was the argument. I think it's very historically uninformed. Yeah, the intentions of the British, it was to basically loot and trample upon India, and the Indians were always fiercely resistant against that one. And going by the democratic norms, if there were any free and fair elections at any point of time in India, where Indians could have their own right to self-determination, then Indians would have voted for the right to secede from Britain, if at all it can be termed that way. And finally, it is because of this this very basic right being denied to Indians in the first place was the reason the entire freedom struggle, that is why it happened. Yeah, so that's the point. That's one more point. And the final point about like the argument was brought up regarding like how this nation building is an ongoing process. And the separatist sentiment, it reflects like alienation and disillusionment of certain masses of the society, living in the state. So I would ask, like, is the cause of separatism, is it helping or hindering the nation building process? If the people, they are going to like remain within the state and work towards their well-being within the state, that will, speeden up this nation building process, and it will lead to their overall welfare, rather than saying that it's like some communities like disaffected and is not relishing the fruits of the nation building process, and that is why they're justified in separatism. It's like the very the very aim that the separatists set out to correct, namely like ensuring that their community is on par with all other communities in India. That very aim is like defeated by the methods adopted by the separatist element, by their original cause. Yeah, so these are the arguments that I would like to make at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samarth. Ashwin, please go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I would like to ask everyone the question: what is the relation of a democracy with referendum, policing and judiciary, corruption and separatism. And one hypothetical question I want to ask is, let's say there are minorities, whether I mean in the case of India, that is Muslims and Christians or whatever. And if the majority of the people, this is just a hypothetical question, if the majority of the people, let's say, want their religions to be abolished, or they expel them from the country or whatever it is, then by definition of democracy, the people have a say in the government and majority of the people will win. So is it the right thing to do is my question. And last of all, I would like to counter Samarth by saying, he justifies Indian independence from British. The same way Kashmiris can give some other reason to justify their independence from India. And economically, I think South Indian states, they contribute more to the nation than the North Indian or Northeast Indian states. So does that justify South Indian states separating from the rest of India? Is my question to Samarth. I mean, I believe he didn't recognize the pattern that if India can give the reason to separate from Britain, why can't individual states or regions give their own reasons to separate from the country as a whole, with or without elections? I mean, is my question. Yeah, I'm done.
All right. Do you want to answer that?
Sure, I'll answer that. I don't think he understood my argument in a better way. So if an election were held during any part of the colonial rule of British India, I am like 100% sure that the majority of Indians would be seceding, if it at all can be called that, majority of Indians would be seceding from British rule. Now, coming to the matter of Kashmir, the point I asked was, who decides the fate of the Kashmir people? Is it just the people in the Kashmir Valley? Or is it the people of the aspired state of J&K? Or the people of the entirety of India? So that election can be held where people of the entirety of India, they will vote for a referendum on Kashmir, and the fate of Kashmir will be decided that way. And so I'm being logical and consistent over here. The fate of the erstwhile British Raj, for it to become independent, that too could have been decided by the free and fair election process, and the issue of the present referendum in Kashmir, that too can be decided in the free and fair election process. Yeah, so
okay. I still have time. Can I continue, Rose? I still have time.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Samarth, that's what I asked you the question. I mean, 80% are a majority and 20% are minority. Can the majority kick the minorities out, expel them from the country? Or that has been the case in the Albanian region, Kosovo and that Albanian region. That's what happened. And if you go by your own logic or whatever, if China invades India and they hold a referendum, if Chinese population is more, then they win naturally. Is it the right thing to do? Is my question. Yeah.
Rose, sorry to butt in, but I think my turn has been missed several times. I've had my hand up for quite some time now.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Let's just let him get his point done, and you can go ahead.
Okay.
Ashwin,
yeah, you got my question right, Samarth. The Chinese invading India.
I got your question very well.
Samarth, I wanted to answer a bit later. I believe it's really unfair to Venkat as well, since he's had his hand up.
Right. I was only insistent upon answering because I was asked the question directly, and he insisted upon me answering. That's the only reason. I can wait for my answer.
Just answer after Venkat, okay? Venkat, please go ahead.
Thanks. So Prince asked the question, are we going to discredit the ED, the Enforcement Directorate? My answer is that they have discredited themselves by trying too eagerly to please the ruling party. The pattern is very clear. It's crystal clear. Can anybody seriously claim that only opposition leaders commit crimes? That the ruling party has never committed any crimes? That members of the ruling party have never committed any crimes? It is also common knowledge that some cases against opposition leaders have been withdrawn as soon as they joined the BJP. Right? That was the price they had to pay. Okay. So speaking of my own state, Karnataka, right? The BJP government in Karnataka was generally considered, one of the most corrupt governments in recent times. How many cases are there against BJP leaders? I read some statistics somewhere that said 95% of corruption cases in India are against opposition leaders. 95%, right? I'm surprised it's not 100%. So the pattern is very, very clear that certain institutions are being used or they are using themselves. It could be voluntary, right? I mean, Indians do have the tendency to align closely to the ruling party. They may be voluntarily trying to please the ruling party by bringing these cases against opposition leaders. Again, the cases themselves may be valid. I have no opinion on that. Maybe they have to go through the courts. But who is being targeted is a very, very important factor. And if only opposition leaders are being targeted, then clearly democracy is under threat. And I think we must also distinguish between the 10-year period from 2014 to 2024 and the period that we are going through now. The picture is quite different. 2014 to 2024 was a period when one party, the BJP, was in power very securely. Of course, they were part of a coalition, but they themselves had more than 272 seats. In the last Lok Sabha, they had 295 seats, I think. So they could pretty much pass any bills, take any legislative measure with absolutely no real opposition from anyone. And they used the opportunity very well. The farm bills, for example, were passed with no parliamentary debates whatsoever. The people, unfortunately, were forced to come out on the streets to protest against the farm laws and have them rolled back. And someone claimed that that is an indication of democracy in action. I would say it's a failure of democracy. Democracy works when issues are debated by our elected representatives in parliament and decisions are thoughtfully made based on the content in those debates. If there is no debate in parliament, if parliament is treated as a rubber stamp, which was the case from 2014 to 2024, then democracy is on the way to failure. Now, Raghav said earlier that some people are claiming that democracy is dead, and I'm not extreme. I'm not saying democracy is dead. It is alive, but barely kicking, right? The only period when democracy actually died in India was during emergency. That is a very, very dark period of India's history. It wasn't clear that we would emerge from it, but we did, right? By sheer luck, we emerged from it. The period from 2014 to 2024 probably ranks next in the gradual erosion of democracy, right? So the people in power realize that doing an emergency is counterproductive. It turns the people against you. Whereas if you gradually subvert institutions over a period of time and reduce the quality of democracy, then the people will not turn against you. A lot of people won't even notice, right? And a lot of people may even argue in favor of those things because you're doing things one by one, slowly, without drawing attention to yourself. And every individual measure looks quite reasonable. It looks quite valid. As people like Prince, believe that cases against opposition leaders were valid. Taken in isolation, they may be valid. But when you see a pattern emerging, then you realize, what is going on. But the period that we are going through now, that is what I wanted to talk about. The period we are going through now from the 2024 election, this is qualitatively different from 2014 to 2024. I believe the democracy has come back or is making a strong effort to come back in India. The ruling party's majority has dropped. They no longer have a majority, right? They've dropped from 295 seats to 240 seats. They have to consult. They must consult other parties in order to get things done. Otherwise, the government is at risk of falling. So I believe that democracy in a very large country like India, democracy can flourish only when we have coalition governments, because then the government can actually, has to consult with other parties. They have to pay attention to all points of view, and they cannot ram through a minority agenda. They cannot ram through one man's agenda. A blunder like demonetization would not have been possible in a coalition government. Either it would have been prevented or the government would have fallen. It's only possible in the case of a single party majority. And for a country like India, I think a coalition government is the most appropriate one. India itself is a coalition. Let's face it. We have, maybe 5 major religions, a huge number of regional groups. languages, we must be a coalition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Venkat. Samarth, you can answer the question now, and Tasneem, you'll be going next.
Sure, we can extend that, the hypothetical situation of China invading India and then establishing a referendum where both the Indian and Chinese people, they get to vote about the future of Indian self-determination. We can extend that hypothesis to the rest of the world ganging up on India and them invading India and forcing a referendum upon India. The rest of the world who had no historical connection to India, they are ganging up on India, and they're going to invade, people who have no right to be here, they're going to invade and force a referendum upon India. It is immoral on so many levels. It is tantamount to saying all of my neighbors, they're going to invade my house, and then they're going to put up a referendum on whether I can stay within my own house or not. People who do not have the moral right to be here in the first place. So that would be my reply.
Thank you, Samarth. Tasneem, go ahead.
I would appreciate all the points which have come up, which have been thought-provoking. And I think for the question that if in case the majority is 80% and the minority is 20%, so it is right or wrong that only the majority's opinion is taken. So, for example, the minority Muslim and Christian community is being oppressed by the majority communities. So, I would like to say that democracy is not only about the majority being in power, but also the majority selects the government, but the government doesn't have all the rights to diminish the rights of minorities or other groups. The government is responsible to take care of all of the citizens, including the minorities, and the fundamental rights have and guidelines have been clearly mentioned in the parliament and also the preamble. And the government which is elected should definitely care about the minority, and this this ensures the stability of the government in place. Otherwise, the majority also will try to shift towards the government, which will definitely give justice to everyone. So in this case, I would like to say democracy is not dead, but democracy, when used in the proper manner and when understood by its definition properly, it can never be under threat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tasneem. Those are some great points right there. Prince, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. Yeah, I'll make it short. Yeah, first of all, people tend to, kind of give a lot more credit to media than they deserve. Media is not an institution of democracy, it's just a business. The term that media is the fourth pillar of democracy was coined by Thomas Carlyle, a historian. That speaks about it. A historian speaking about political terms. Well, we know where that goes. The media will run on TRP and they'll show what sells. They are not liable to question the government on every perspective. Someone said, I guess it was Ashwin who said that the classical South versus North narrative. The only reason South was able to develop is due to the freight equalization policy. I guess you should read about it, and then you'll realize why South developed on the bloods of the North. Then you also pointed out about the China and all that thing. Okay, so first of all, none of the Indian states legally can claim independence because their rulers at that time had signed an instrument of accession, a legally binding agreement with the Indian state to be a part of it. Secondly, the difference between the Indian freedom and the extremism going on in Kashmir is Indian freedom was not won by violence, it was won by non-violence. On the contrary, India was kind of taken over through a series of wars. The British left us legally. There was a proper law and a bill passed, and everybody knows about the 1947 India Independence Act. Thirdly, someone said that would we kick out the minority if, in democracy we just think of the majority. One of the cases I like to bring is in 1951, the population of Muslims was 9.8% of India. Let aside the whole 9.8%. Can anyone give me an instance of one Muslim that was kicked out because the majority of 85% was of the other faith? No one can kick out any person who is a citizen of India. That's why we have the government. Just a second. Yeah, no one can kick out any member of minority. That's why we have the government. And if Chinese government is to occupy us via war, first of all, that would be illegal. Secondly, okay, if they want, then they should hold a referendum. And if shove comes to push comes to shove, sorry, then if the Chinese win the referendum, then legally India has to be a part of China. Venkat pointed out great points. That the ED is being used against political parties. I guess he was talking about the prominent leaders. That the point that 95% of prominent leaders were of opposition. It's weird because who's opposition in India? Indian opposition consists of 28 parties. If we just do simple maths, that 4.1 case per party out of the 115 case on the total opposition. And if we see the cases on the BJP leaders, then that's 6. That is more than the average that the opposition party is facing. And if democracy is to be dead, then by that definition, democracy was never alive in India. We made our constitution in 1950. I would urge all of you to go and read the first constitutional amendment that was passed just 1 year after the implementation of constitution. The basic freedom of expression and speech was suppressed. What democracy were we living in then? On the contrary, the freedom of expression throughout the years have increased. So many of us would argue that the democracy is in the rise in India. It's not just because one party lost this election or lost the overall control that they had. It's not that if one party is in power, then the democracy is alive, and on the contrary, the democracy is dead. Yes.
Thank you so much, Prince. Sandeep, you can go ahead, and Samarth, you'll be up next.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if
Sorry to
everybody
interrupt. My deepest apologies, but I think I'm being passed over again. Something is wrong. Do you even see my
No,
raised
I
hand?
raised my
I do
hand
see.
when you were
All
speaking.
right, Sandeep, one second. The thing, Venkat, is I'm not like doing it on purpose. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, guys.
I know.
Why don't you go ahead, Sandeep? Why don't you go ahead and I'll explain to you after he's spoken. There's a lot of noise in my background. I'm sorry.
Can we restart his clock? So because I interrupted him, sorry.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so I just wanted to say, I think either nobody understood what I said or nobody paid attention to what I said. I just wanted to go back to the fundamentals again. See, before we talk about Indian democracy as at all, we have to question the legitimacy of the way we elect our officials. Is the voting system itself is fundamentally flawed to its core? As Mr. Venkat pointed out, the government would be much better off if we had a coalition. So when do we have a coalition? We cannot have a coalition when the power is being concentrated towards one or two parties. It has been concentrated between BJP and INC for a very, very long time. Why is that? It is because of the way our election system works, because of the way we elect our representatives. Because even if you let's say for instance for the sake of change, there is some party that does come into opposition which doesn't have a lot of votes, but eventually it will die down because the more and more power you distribute to the one or two parties, we essentially have a democracy that has dictatorship between 2 or 3 parties. So the fundamental basics of how the democracy is, our Indian democracy itself, is flawed to its core. And yeah, okay, fine. I'll go later. Okay, fine.
Sandeep, what about referendum? You never spoke anything about it.
Referendum, I'm not sure. Can you come again?
Okay, next when my turn comes.
All right.
No, you can speak. There is still time.
Okay, referendum is when the people are directly select what they want. For example, do you want a nuclear power plant in your city or not? Something like that. In Switzerland, it happens very often. I mean,
It's
people
like a
directly
plebiscite.
choose. People directly choose what they want. In India or in democracy or in elections, we choose a representative, and the representative in the parliament, they get to decide what they do for the country. But a referendum, you directly choose what you want for the country. Like, well, I
Yes,
understood what I
exactly.
said.
See, yeah. So as we have, see, even let's say if I voted for BJP, it doesn't mean that whatever they will be doing is according to what I wish or what I hope for. So that is where the things what you call a referendum comes in. Because just because we elected an representative, it doesn't mean he's set for next 5 years and do whatever they want. So there is a blockade. Okay, you're in power now, but then you will have to consult us back when you're going to take a decision on a micro level, right? That is what you're trying to say. Yes, I understand
Exactly.
that. So yes, that should exist, because so if I have to speak, people have been saying that India still have some kind of, it's not dying or it's not under threat. I would literally go out right and say, if a common man who doesn't have a power, political power, commits the same crime, let's say financial crime, and then if the same financial crime is committed by a person in power, you all know that it is not going to be the same, that they will be treated in front of the law, right? So there you go, your democracy is dead right there. So it does mean that do we dictate everything that happens in a democracy and based on this? Probably yes, because when you're treating somebody in power that you elected, you gave them power technically, and they are being treated, they are supposed to be representing you instead of they are exploiting you. So as long as this exists, it's not just Indian democracy, any democracy in the world, as long as this happens, the democracy is technically it is dead, right? So on that basis itself, I would say every democracy in the world is dead. But the fact is, are we trying to understand that, as Mr. Ashwin has pointed out, there is a referendum in Switzerland, so there are we have to learn and understand. But when it comes to India, it's very, very big, and every state has its own freedom of doing some things, and the central has too much power nowadays that they are trying to control the states themselves, not to take their own decision. So yes, individual states should have more freedom. The council, the individual state, the districts are the micro power should be triumph when it comes to affecting their own livelihoods, instead of going to a centralized decision that doesn't consult the people who are on the routes. Thank you.
All right. Samarth, you'll be next, but before I let you speak, to clear the misunderstanding for Venkat. Venkat, the thing was, I had Samarth, can you mute yourself for a second? Samarth? Okay, thank you. So Venkat, the thing is I had to lower a hand myself for a couple times, so that may have been the cause of confusion. Plus, I have to let people speak in order, but I also have to keep in mind that people who have not spoken as much in comparison to others also get a fair chance to put their point. So maybe that was the reason why you felt a little left out, or like you were not being given the chance to speak, but that was definitely not the intention.
No,
For
no,
you or for
Rose,
anybody.
you're doing a great job of moderation. I know you're not trying to shut down anyone. That's not the thing. I was just wondering if there's a problem in Zoom or something, where my raised hand is not even being seen. Then, I just end up waiting, right, forever. So that's all I was saying. I know that you didn't intend to shut anyone down.
Yeah,
I
I
think
was
if you
just
go to
trying to.
the list of participants, you can see the preference order who has raised the hand first. If I'm not wrong, that is, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I can see your raised hand, but then when you stop speaking, right, you don't lower your hand yourself. I've lowered your hand myself a couple times, so that may have been the cause of confusion.
Okay.
I let Samat speak and then you can go ahead. There's no problem. I hope we're good. All right.
Yeah.
Samat, please go ahead.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Rose. I think Sandeep, when he elaborated upon the various flaws in our democracy, I think he brought a very valid point about how in our country it is the elected representatives, they are elected based on the, so we have this basis of like first past the post system, like whoever gets the most votes, they win. Whereas, I think there are better ways to do this one, elect our representatives. In Germany, for example, I got to know that they have the proportional representation system, where the elected representatives, they will be sent to the parliament, their number being based on the proportional vote share. So I think that would be better for India and for all democracies in general, so that we can avoid many of the uh, uh, the propaganda stuff and the electoral fraud stuff. Here, political parties, they are so much engaged in winning the election, and they will somehow manage to just gobble up those extra number of votes to defeat their opponents and get elected. Whereas if we change the system to this proportional representation system, all of this election related antics and all of these frauds, and all of the time and energy being wasted upon the elections, they will come down, because electoral parties, they will understand, the political parties, that uh, the extra effort, the extra money that they're going to spend upon winning a seat, that will not translate into them getting the brute majority required, or them getting the kind of seats they envision, because it will ultimately be based on the proportional representation system, and the electorate as a whole, it cannot be bent to suit their requirements or their maneuvers. So just to uh, reduce all of the kinds of election related focus, and focus more on the governments and giving the proportional representation to the people, this kind of representation system would be much better suited, in my opinion. And this, the other thread of discussion that I see going on over is, who is the greater in the present day political climate of India? Which party is engaged in the actions that diminishes the democratic culture in our country more? Is it the ruling coalition, or is it the opposition coalition? For the time being, it seems that since the ruling coalition, they have all of the levers of power, they are abusing the levers of power. But but just because it is happening at the moment, you must not discount the ability and the willingness and the motive for the opposition to subvert democracy when they came into power. We must not make this mistake. So we must gauge what the political culture of the opposition parties is on its own basis. We must choose. We must choose to look into what are the political stances they hold, whether it is reasonable or not. What are the political associations? With whom do they associate with? Do they associate with, at all, with the people who do not have the best interests of our country in mind? To the opposition parties, do they engage in such actions at all? So we must keep this in mind, because right now they might be underdog, the opposition, but when they come into power, will they be able to conduct themselves fairly, or will it be, how in the previous revolutions, like the underdog, they came into power and virtually took all of the political power, and they were worse than the regime that they replaced. We must keep this also in mind. And I would make the argument that the opposition is in fact much more extreme and much more radical than the ruling coalition, but I will do that at a later point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samarth. Venkat, you can.
Yeah, so the question came up about whether the majority can trample on the rights of the minorities, and that is which it is important to really to clarify that the protection of minority rights is core to democracy. It's a core part of democracy. A democracy that does not protect the rights of minorities is not a democracy at all. It's a tyranny of the majority. So that is very, very important. And it is also important to clarify what the starting point of democracy really was. So from today's vantage point, if you ask anyone to define the essence of democracy, they will tell you that it's about, and it's basically about reflecting the will of the people. The people should rule, and the people's wishes should be honored, and that is the essence of democracy. Actually, the starting point of democracy was something else. The starting point was basically to set limits to the power of the government, to the power of the monarch. Democracy in its modern form, or representative government, is a gradual, basically comes to us from a gradual evolution of the political system in Britain. Initially, Britain was a monarchy, but the English people or the British people felt that they had several rights that they had inherited from the past. And whenever the monarch trampled on those rights, they fought against the monarch, either non-violently or violently, and they forced the monarch to acknowledge those rights that they had inherited. And that is why the modern beginning of democracy is considered to be Magna Carta, which is about 800 years ago. The British people forced King John to sign the Great Charter, or the Magna Carta, which recognized their inherited rights. And then later on, there was the English Civil War, where Charles I was tried and executed for treason against his country. And then later on, the American Revolution as well, which was also a civil war for all practical purposes. But the common thread in all of these is basically to set limits to the power of the government. The essence of the difference, even today, between a democracy and an undemocratic government is that undemocratic governments recognize no limits to the power of the government. The government can basically put you in prison for saying things. They can confiscate your property. There's no trial, there's no due process. Whereas in a democracy, there are limits to what the government can do. So that is the essence of democracy. It is actually a negative definition. It is defined more by what the government cannot do rather than by any positive qualities. And Prince, made a reference to the First Amendment of the Constitution, which actually imposed reasonable restrictions, quote unquote, reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech. I agree, if that's the point Prince is making, I agree that that is an abridgment of democracy. But the unfortunate fact is that, the theory of democracy must coexist in practice with the realities of the country and the people among whom, that political system is to survive. And this point has come up in previous debates, and I think Prince was present in those debates also. The Indian people have not reached that maturity level where untrammeled freedom of speech can be allowed. There are various sectarian groups in the country that are ready to resort to violence the moment they hear somebody say something. So in a country like that, you cannot possibly have full freedom of speech. You need reasonable restrictions. Of course, that kind of provision in the Constitution is liable to be abused, and it has been abused in the past. But I do agree that that's an abridgment of freedom of speech. The other last point I want to make is about, this point came up again and again. Can a region decide to secede? I don't think it is very directly related to the state of democracy in India today, but since the point came up again and again, my thinking is a bit different on this. I think that the love of country is a modern thing, and it is a manufactured emotion. We all had to take this pledge in school, saying all Indians are our brothers and sisters, and so on. You need to do that sort of thing only when it doesn't happen naturally. I mean, you don't have to take a pledge, saying that I'm going to love my children as though they are my own children, because they are your children and you will love them, right? There's no need to manufacture any emotion. But in a country like India, especially a country like India, which is so large and so diverse, there are many groups of people who do not feel any natural affinity for one another. And so you have to manufacture that affinity. And that is the reason we have all these institutions and so on. And the right of secession has to be looked at from that standpoint. Run out of time. Sorry, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Venkat. Ashwin, it's your turn.
Yeah, fine. I would like to say that some people do not deserve to vote, or they deserve much lesser weight based on parameters like education and age and stuff like that. Of course, we have the upper house and the lower house in India, actually, wherein the upper house, actually, I believe they are elected in a different way compared to the lower house. And I believe people should have more say in the functioning of the country, which is why Raghav has started this group to make an impact in that way. And what is written on paper and the reality can be much different, as we all see. I mean, corruption is one such example. And I would like to counter Samarth by saying, he gave the example of rest of India invading India and holding a referendum. The same can be said by me as well. I can claim that my land was occupied by Maharashtra or something like that. I mean, I can say that Maharashtra people are different from me. Tamil Nadu people are different from me. Keralites are different from me. I want my own state. I can say in that way. Just like how he is saying that people outside India are not Indians and they are different from him. I can say that people outside my province are different from me. I mean, this is just an argument. It doesn't mean that I really think that way. And coming to the minority, the minorities do have rights. What Venkat pointed out, that minorities shouldn't be squashed. I mean, there should be given a chance as well. I mean, to live as well. I mean, peacefully. But I believe there is a uniform civil code in India that is coming up, or come up, or I don't know. And there are common rules for marriages, like Islamic rules for Islamic marriage have been. I don't know if it is being wiped out or if it still exists or whatever, but I believe triple talaq has been removed. So that was the rule of the minority. So the question is, should that rule be respected, or should it be removed? If the majority of the people think that it's not a correct rule, it's not a sensible rule, it should be removed. But the minorities think that, oh, it's our rule, we should be allowed to keep it. It doesn't affect you. So there lies the question, and there lies the debate. So should their rights be respected? If so, was banning triple talaq justifiable is my question. I'm done for now. You can counter me, I have 2 minutes.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
So this is not exactly a counter, it's kind of an addition to your point, Ashwin. I think that there are two kinds of rights, community rights and individual rights. And rules like triple talaq or any other such rules are basically community rights. And I would say that where there is a conflict between individual rights and community rights, then individual rights should triumph. Individual rights should be given precedence. Again, within the limits of what the country's culture will allow. If there is a possibility of large-scale violence, as a result of individual rights being enforced against the rights of the community, that factor has to be taken into account by the government of the day, because nothing is possible in an atmosphere of anarchy. Nothing is possible in an atmosphere of large-scale violence, and that should be taken into account. But if it is possible to enforce individual rights against community rights in a relatively peaceful manner, doesn't have to be entirely peaceful. There'll always be some disturbances, but in a relatively peaceful manner, if it's possible to enforce it, then individual rights, in my opinion, should always have precedence.
There is 30 seconds left anyway. I do not know how you distinguish individual rights from community rights. I still didn't understand that.
Okay, individual rights are the rights granted to us by the Constitution, right? The common so there are rules that are religious in origin, right? And there are rules that are also community or caste based in origin. So it is based on the origin of those rules. Triple talaq does not come from individuals. It comes from a certain religious tradition, right? Islamic religious tradition, or some subsect of it. The caste system, for instance, is some kind of assertion of community, right? It comes from ancient Hinduism. Okay, I'll stop.
Okay, thanks, guys. So we are at 12:30, and we still have Prince and Sandeep left. So maybe we can just like let them both have like 3 minutes each, and then like we can go on to the open session. So Prince, go ahead.
Thanks, Ravi. So firstly, onto the point of UCC that Ashwin brought, I'm totally in support of that. There should be no UCC because UCC is just a common civil code for both Hindus and Muslims, which currently enjoy different civil codes, which are more specific to their religion. I would also come forward and invite our Muslim friends to get rid of this uniformity in criminal code and truly have a communitarian legal system. Someone said that there is a duality if a common person commits a crime versus, a common person do some kind of financial crime and a politician does some. I do agree. Firstly, that is a case of flawed democracy, and about 5 to 10 years earlier, there used to be a very common saying that if you're fighting case in Allahabad High Court and you have money, and if you lose that case, then you're done. Is there equality before law? And if so, then people come forward and say that just because they're elected politicians, they should not be, tried so heavily just because they're elected. On the first past the post, I do agree that proportional voting is the best form of voting, but in 1951, there was 18.33% literacy rate in India. At that time, first past the post was the best. And I don't think any government is going to change the voting pattern now because basic things like introduction of EVM was being criticized. Introduction of demonetization is criticized, which was brought forward to counter corruption. There was a lot of issues in the implementation of that policy due to which corruption still lingers around. And one thing that it was successful in was removing the higher denomination of currencies because that leads to an even greater rate of this inflation and the degradation of currency. Just to finish my points, I'll say that total demonetization is the future, and it is the only way to counter corruption. And there are certain new ways coming out, like introduction of UPI, and I'm not sure if it is implemented or it's going to be, but the introduction of ideas like e-rupee, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, Sandeep, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I think democracy is a work in progress, but the fact that we elect a leader every 5 years and then we close our eyes. I wouldn't say like literally close our eyes and do whatever they want, but the fact that once we elect them and then they are set for next 5 years, not really accountable for anything. So instead of a system like that, electing a leader should only be a part of their power execution. I might also argue that, okay, if we do not give power as a whole to them, there could be a roadblock on every single instance of what they are trying to do, but not in every action they would do. But if it is going to affect the large population in a significant way, any bill that is passed is not approved by people. It is approved by the of course, we elected them, and they are the ones who is passing the bills, even if it is against us. But the fact that they are not, being held accountable. See, we how many of us actually know if a bill has been passed, and if your elected MLA or MP is a part of it or not? So we do not ourselves hold accountable. As I think Mr. Venkat has pointed out, is Indian population is it has reached an extent level where it has not reached a level where we cannot actually do that. So, and when it comes to minority, but if you're referring to a religious minority, I think there is no such separate law required for anybody who is a religious minority. Everybody has the same rights as an individual who is also not a minority. But there is always an argument to say that we need to protect them because of the fact that they are minority and they are vulnerable. I would agree to an extent, but again, there could be laws to protect them, but not. I don't think you need to have a separate law to give more, or let them exercise their own rights. Because if you segregate some group, religious community, religious people as a minority, and then give them special rights, I can come up with 100 ways of creating new minorities, which is not ideal. Thank you.
Yeah, is it the open session now?
Yeah, guys, we can just go ahead and have an open discussion. Anybody can.
Yeah, I would like to start off.
But just make sure that nobody's talking over each other, or I mean, we want to have like one person speak at a time. So just
yeah.
Actually, Ashwin, I had a question for you, right? You're going to speak, so maybe I should ask the question first. When you said
okay.
when you said that you're unable to distinguish between community rights and individual rights, was that you're genuinely? I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but are you genuinely not able to distinguish between the two, or you're trying to make a rhetorical point? Because if it's the former, then I can try to explain what I think is the difference between the two.
I'll give you an example, and you tell me which is which. Okay.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to marriage laws, Hindus have a separate law, and Muslims and Christians have a separate laws. Okay. The same law, I mean, triple talaq is a part of marriage only. It's a divorce law. I mean, the triple talaq was removed, but because it was thought to be nonsensical. If you're removing, if you think that it's a community law and it has to be removed, then why not remove Islamic marriage law as well? And why not remove Hindu marriage law and bring up a uniform marriage law? I'll tell you one nonsensical thing in Hindu marriage law, because divorce in Hindu marriage law, because I've inquired about it. If Hindu man asks for divorce, he has to compulsorily pay alimony to his wife. But according to Islam and Christianity, I mean, a marriage can be considered as a contract. And if the contract says that I'm not going to pay you anything if you divorce me, they did not pay. But Hindu marriage cannot be considered as a contract. So whatever I say to my wife before getting married, and if I divorce her, nothing will hold good. Everything will be wiped out. And the court will say none of these conditions will hold good, whatever conditions I put to her before the marriage.
Right.
So now you tell me, what is community law and what is individual law? I mean, there are all the marriage laws are based on religion only. That is 3 communities. Now you tell me.
Right. So these are examples of laws based on community rights. The community claims certain rights, and the law has recognized those claims and has decided to make those claims legally valid. Now, are there could there be a conflict between individual rights versus community rights? The triple talaq itself is a good example of that, right? The triple talaq is an assertion of community rights, and we don't have to debate whether is it in accordance with Sharia law. We don't know. We are not experts. We don't really know much about it, but it is clearly an example of the rights of the community. It is not in conformance with the rights of the individual. Now, if such a case goes to court, now before this triple talaq was abolished, if such a case goes to court, and a woman who has been divorced in that manner by her husband, takes him to court, then what should the court do is the question, right? According to Indian constitutional law, at that point, I'm assuming that the court has to recognize community right and recognize the validity of divorce according to the triple talaq method. What I stated is my personal opinion, Ashwin. That's what I want to clarify, right? In a true democracy, in a real democracy, I think that individual rights should be paramount. And where there is a conflict between individual rights and community rights, individual rights should be given precedence. Then you could say, what is the value of community rights? If any individual can, flout it at any point, I would say that the value of community rights is only so long as people choose to respect it. So it's communities are voluntary associations of people, right? So it is valid only so long as an individual considers themselves part of the community and is willing to abide by the rules of the community, knowing that if they flout the rules, if they disobey the rules, then they may be ejected from the community. This is at a broad level. Now, if you drill down to individual cases, these things do become quite gray, right? I'll give two examples, and I'm not consistent with regard to how I interpret both of them. So I'm giving you a full view of the inconsistency in this in my own mind. There was a temple in Kerala which did not allow women into their premises. I would say that's clearly an assertion of a community right? Or considering the temple authorities as a community. But there was a movement, a legal movement, to basically force the temple to allow women inside. That is an assertion of individual rights. Women are individuals, and the idea is that their individual rights should prevail over the rights of the community rights of the temple. So in my mind, at least, that's very clear. Now, another example, I am actually a member of a club, right? I'm paying for a membership of the club. And that club has a restaurant inside the premises. And on 2 occasions, they have denied me entry into that restaurant because I was wearing shorts and not full trousers, right? Is that a violation of my individual right? It's probably not a significant violation, but it is a violation of sorts. So if I apply my own principle, I should argue that they should be forced to allow me into that restaurant wearing shorts. But the counter argument would be that I am voluntarily choosing to be a member of the club. If I don't like the rules, I can leave. So there is a tension there, right? How I believe we can resolve the tension is, by pointing these entities like temples and religions and these ancient communities. There are things which we have inherited from a very long time, very long while ago, and we were not part of that original contract where we submitted. It was some ancestor of ours who agreed to those rules. We never agreed ourselves. And so in those cases, I think individual rights should prevail. But I don't believe that is how Indian law operates.
So I have a 2-part question. I think you answered it partially, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The first question is, so if somebody is getting married through community, right? Let's say for example a Hindu marriage, there is no inherently active law involved. When they get married communally and religiously, and then when they want to divorce, by the inherent logic, they should be able to do it communally or religiously. Why the law is not interfering when they want to get married, but they are interfering when they want to get divorced? That's my first question. The second question is, as you have already, I think, answered it partly, because they are a part of the community, which of course we haven't voluntarily agreed to it, but they did get into a religious communal marriage. There is a underlying understanding that they are agreeing to it either by not of they don't have a lot of options to do it, or it has been the biggest force around them that they cannot escape it. There could be 2 ways. So because the community, because they know that what they are doing it, so doesn't it inherently triumph their own rights? They are triumphing their own rights, and they are putting the communal rights above theirs.
Yes,
yeah,
so
that's the second part.
Yeah, both great questions. When does the law need to intervene? in any situation when someone is complaining, right?
Yes, there is a
if-
conflict. Yeah.
That's when the law needs to intervene. If two
Intervene.
people are getting married and no one is objecting, there is no reason for the law to intervene. But when there is a divorce, and again, if both people are amicably divorcing, there's consent, if they're divorcing by mutual consent, I really don't think there is a need for the law to intervene. But if one of the two parties, disagree, disputes the divorce, or there are people in the family who dispute it for whatever reason, the law probably feels compelled
Then
to.
isn't it the law should say, okay, you have your own communal laws. Why should a constitutional law should intervene when you have agreed to they have agreed to their own laws? Shouldn't the internal court in the community itself, where it's like a double-edged sword? You're giving them freedoms to choose, make some decisions communally, but you're not letting them, are not like you're giving them power when it comes to conflict. Yes, I understand that, but again, because the law is intervening only in the half the part of it, isn't it the source of the problem itself? Because they are not intervening when they are getting into marriage.
So when again, I don't know exactly how the Indian law operates. Let me be honest. So what I'm saying is mostly what I think should be, rather than what is. When two parties come to court for a settlement, the implicit understanding is that other forms of mediation, other forms of conflict resolution have failed, and they are coming to court. Even in the case of, let's say,
No, actually, even if both parties are in agreement, the sad fact is you have to get it attested by the law. Let's say if I want to divorce my wife and we both are happy to do it, we cannot do it without getting the certificate from the registrar.
Right. So in that case, divorce is also involves property divisions and all of that, right? And so the law has to get involved in property divisions and who gets what. If the wife claims half of her husband's property, the law has to get involved, right? If a wife claims half of the husband's property and the husband disputes it, the law has to get involved. So there are many situations where the law has to get involved. But my understanding is that law has to get involved only when there is a dispute or a conflict. If two parties are in complete agreement on everything, I do not see why the law should get involved. Are there cases where
laws don't have to get involved, but you have to get it approved by the law? That if let's say I have to prove that I'm divorced, because I cannot get married again without the divorce certificate.
But getting approved is just a legal part of it. It's just a paperwork. That is not an issue we are talking about.
No, see, let's say if two Hindus got married, they don't have to get a certificate that they are married, but they are set for life. As long as everything is fine, law is like, okay, it's not my problem. Yes, it makes sense, because if there is no conflict, why should you go somewhere and put your things into it? But what I'm trying to say is, they're putting one feet into it and they're not putting the other feet in. If you really want to get into it, why not?
The reason is because the person whom you divorced can come back and say that I haven't divorced you. Then what will you do? When you want, let's say, exactly, that causes consequence.
They should get in fully. Like, even if it is a Hindu, religious or communal or religious marriages, you do whatever you want. But when you get into a marriage, you have to get it certified that, okay, unless you do this, you're not married. Isn't it how it should be? If you're talking about unified civil code for everybody.
The problem with this is poor people, they won't know the rules, man, and they won't get it registered, and it causes problems for that. See, everything is taken into consideration when a law is made.
Okay.
Also, the law cannot be made in a vacuum, right? With theory as the sole guide.
Yes.
It has to be.
I understand.
It has to be relevant to the conditions of the people. And
if a law is made, it can also be misused against you. You know what I mean? I mean, they also they keep a balance such that the law shouldn't be misused. See, if you make rape, if you give death penalty for rape, somebody can file a false case against you they can show false evidence against you and they can put you to death. And maybe they'll get benefit out of you by if you pass away. That's why there has to be a balance. That is how laws are made. Taking into consideration that it cannot be misused against someone.
See, and the other fact is that, even though our laws are inherited from Britain, most of the conflicts in Britain for citizens' rights were conflicts against the government. But if you look at Indian history, we have rarely had tyrannical governments because India was so fragmented, in the past that, there was a very little scope for tyranny. And there was tyranny, but again, the more important tyranny in people's day-to-day lives was the tyranny of communities and the tyranny of society, the caste system and various other forms of right. And in fact, most of the movements in India also were movements against the social system, not movements against the government. And so the Indian law has to keep that reality in mind. And that is one reason why we needed this restrictions on reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech. Because if somebody from one community makes a statement and people of another community start rioting, you have to keep that reality in mind. You can't just make laws in a vacuum, and that is the most important reality of India. The movements in India have been against society itself, social oppression, the caste system, social injustice, and so on.
Guys, I just want to interrupt. Can I make someone the host over here because I need to go?
Actually, I also need to drop. But this was a great discussion. Ashwin, thanks, Ashwin and Sandeep and everyone, really. Thanks for bringing some great points. Made me think. I had to think very hard.
Sandeep and Samarth, you want to stay?
Thank you, everyone.
You're leaving as well?
I too will be leaving because of the festivities. I can't stay for lunch.
Okay, fine. See you.
Ganesh Chaturthi.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.